another game. I don't know if you'll ever get the chance to actually grab a copy of it. It's called Marvel Universe. It was published in 2003. And it had a really interesting set of ways that you wrote in a bunch of stuff during a session. There were little phrases about your character or little taglines that you came up with, or, I did this, or I can do that, or any number of things of that sort. But you choose which one you want to keep. And that becomes a mechanic on your sheet. So all that stuff happened, but you decide which one actually sticks with the character as a concept as we go forward.
Yeah,
Stuff like that.
Maybe a lot because of the 3 different paths that they can take. You can write something in for each one, but you have to decide at the end which one you're keeping.
Right. Mm-hmm. Stuff like that. So all these are just sort of different mechanics of the general concept that we're talking about, which is to have, like the pool, you change verbally. Your character changes verbally as you go on. And how do we do that? How does that happen? So, and what does that have to do with sort of the ongoing thing? I mean, the ongoing thing of your character's whole, deal. The pool offers nothing of the kind. The pool doesn't say this has to end. In my opinion, playing, with heart over a period of time, you may find that your character's now paragraphed little saga kind of does end here.
Yeah.
Kind of does.
Right.
And that's a magnificent thing when it happens, and especially when you don't expect it, and you're like, oh, great novel, and you didn't do it by accident. You didn't accidentally make up the novel.
Right.
And it seems so inevitable in retrospect that it turned out this way. So if that's the kind of thing that you're aiming at with this, particularly if there is at least an enjoyable pop culture philosophical statement to be made. Right. Then sure. I mean, but you're not going to get there just by empowering people to invent detail as you go along.
Right. Yeah.
That's a relatively, it's a functional but not particularly exciting or interesting point in and of itself. Yeah. So anyway, those are some thoughts and some comparisons I thought might be kind of useful because I think you needed kind of a jog.
Yeah. No, I agree. Right? Yeah. Yep.
So that's
and a lot of it too. Well, like I had mentioned, I had lost my original version of the game, and so a lot of the reason why it took so long for me to really get back into it was like. I would sit down. I'm like, all right, jog your memory.
Right.
What is it
that
you wrote?
Yeah.
What did I do before? Mm-hmm. And the 2 things I remember, obviously, you commented on the Godless Wandering Ronin thing, which I thought was stuck with me, and it's like, okay, that's got to be there because it's significant. I think I like it significant, or it should be significant. But also the original dice mechanic, which was basically 50-50. You rolled your pools of D6s, 4 to 6 was success, 1 to 3 was not. And several people had mentioned maybe one more step beyond just a 50-50 roll might make it more interesting. And that's one reason I have fiddled with the dice. I really actually considered for a time doing it similar to, basically risk rolls, the 2 sides, whoever gets the highest dice wins that particular throw, or something like the Riddle of Steel, how it was done in that, which I always really liked, the dice in that as well. And I still feel like I'm still working with how the dice should come out and things like that. Although talking about the pool has helped a little bit as well.
Right. I think the important thing to do in thinking about this is it's kind of like what I was talking about with Jared with his game Night Waves. One of our Discord exchanges about it, not on screen recorded, but just like little chit chat back and forth about it. And he was doing that thing. I was actually thinking of him when I was talking a minute ago, when he was saying, well, what if we look at like whether the dice make a straight, or do I get a straight? Do I get a bunch of matches? Do I get a flush? Do I get a straight? Why don't we look at that too? Because I'm always looking at this pile of dice I rolled. We could pull stuff out of that and say, okay, well, this came up, so that means you're going to get this point of weight or something like that. Right. And I was thinking, don't you think you're getting a little nuanced? Do we have to like dissect every roll for every imaginable way that the numbers can be, examined? To go find a bunch of stuff, to invent a bunch of stuff into what's going on. And I mentioned the game Rain by Greg Stolze, which is based on rolling and looking for matches. And he has this whole thing where the height is the value of your highest die, and the width is the number of matches, and then you had points by which you could squeeze it or flatten it, for different effects of different kinds. And it started to get to the point where you're like gazing at your pool of dice, and you just have this whole Sudoku set of options about what you're going to do with it, but that lets you affect the story you see, that kind of thing.
Right.
And I was like, and I remember thinking, for Christ's sake, can't I just know whether I hit the guy?
Right.
And have that be that? Why don't we have roles we just have to live with? And so I mentioned that to Jared, and Jared said, you know what? I was just thinking the same thing. He said, enough with the stupid dice tricks.
Yes. Right.
So that's the quote from Jared, which is very helpful.
It is.
We should think more in terms of that larger architecture, and then say what kind of dice and how reading them makes that happen. And that's the dice system. Now, that's when we're at this level of analysis of the game. If we were way back in the beginning and you hadn't been, poking at it all this time, if we were way back in the beginning and you said, I've got to use this resolution roll, I just can't get it out of my head, right? I'm going to roll this, and it's like what I was doing with Slay With Me, and I was like, you got to stack the dice. Okay, you got to stack them. And my friend is looking at me like, stack the dice? What the hell? And I'm like, you have to. The system has to stack the dice. It has to, right? And they're like, okay. And so then I go ahead and I build this whole thing around that. Well, that's your weird brain talking, and you don't argue with your weird brain. You let your weird brain do it. But that's at the beginning of the process.
Yeah.
Later on, if you find yourself overwhelmed by all the different, so you just rattled off a whole bunch of systems at me. The first one you described without naming it is Burning Wheel. Second one was Sorcerer. Then you bring up Riddle of Steel. Right. You're kind of rattling them off, and it's like, okay, no, I know what's going on here. You don't know what the dice are for.
Right.
That's the problem.
I kind of do, but they don't. But it's not.
It's not the way we know what they're for in the pool.
Right.
Not like that. And that's what I think you need to focus on. And if you want anything to go by, go back to the philosophy. Go to your pop philosophy.
Okay.
Go to the voiceover in the beginning of the video game where the guy is intoning this bullshit at you, before you get to start playing. Go to the opening of the Chinese comic.
Right.
And there's that, paragraph of, in the scroll, there's an unfurling scroll running down the side of the page. And, you read this about, in the year of such and such, the choice between this and that, faces our heroes. Whatever it is, read that again and say, how does what I do as a player with the dice do that?
Right.
It may be very direct, or it may be very indirect and just be about what becomes of my character when he faces that. So, I mean, a simplistic design would say, oh, well, you have this many dice in this answer and that many dice in that answer. And it's kind of like what they did with the latest RuneQuest, where you actually put like points into runes. I have this many points in that rune,
Yes.
that kind of thing. You could do that, or you could be very indirect, like the pool, which only says what happens.
Right.
But it happens.
Yes.
Right? It happens, and it changes my sheet, and I have different traits now than I did. It does happen mechanically. So that's what I mean by direct influence from the ideology, color, verbiage of the game. Either a direct influence, or in the presence of that, how do I change within it in more open-ended ways? Either one. But that's what the dice do because of what you've chosen to do with them. And it's one of the reasons why, ultimately, games where the dice only allow you to roll to hit or roll to notice are all the same.
Right.
And somebody can say, I like percentile dice. Like, fuck you. It's doing exactly the same as the dice pool. If all you're doing is rolling to hit or rolling to notice, and after that everything is just resource management, then no, you're right. The dice don't matter. They're just a percentage roll.
You're just trying to create a larger, discrete, you're just trying to create a larger board for success.
Right.
Right. I mean, basically, a D100 is still a D20 if you just divide by 5.
In fact, the early RuneQuest used percentile dice, but every single increment in the game was a multiple of 5. Every single one.
And why was that? Because if you wanted to use, and why did they? Well, I guess they said they didn't. No one's producing the D10s, the D100s, so they use D20s. But still, I think there's probably more to it than that.
But the important point, I mean, I think that's definitely a historical part of this.
Yeah.
But what I'm driving at is that even bell curves are still percentages, and there's a reason you might want to use a bell curve instead of a flat one. But the fact is that you're still assessing it in terms of just percentage. And the question then is, percentage for what? And ultimately, in a lot of these games, it's the more rolls I make, the less damage I will take. The more rolls I succeed in means the monster has less chances to hit me because I've killed it in time.
Right.
So that means, because it's very statistical, right?
Yeah.
And then you just expand that over all the encounters of the session. And then you're also looking at resources that you can do to either increase your defenses or increase your offensive power, or to give you more information to strategize about what's going on. And that's it. Really, all you're doing is holding, the game master is attacking your hit points. Bam, 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 bam. And you're just finding all the ways that you can slow it down, stave it off, step aside. And you get exactly that behavior that I was so critical about with Lamentations. All that lurching and hunching and sneaking and peering and, because each one of you is like walking around with your hit points in your chest going, don't touch my hit points, look out, here it comes, my hit points are coming, gotta stay away from my hit points, And that's all the game is. So everything else, you distract yourself by making the situation imaginatively interesting.
Yeah.
But it's just a distraction.
Right.
So instead, we have games with a very different relationship of points, dice, talking, events, and development.
Right.
Does that help a little bit? To say, okay, in that case, what's the dice for in my case?
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. No, it definitely helps. All of this helps. Trust me.
Oh, excellent. Trust me. Glad to hear it. Yeah. Because it's a little bit, it's a little. This conversation, I knew we were probably going to have it. This conversation is very thematic. Right? This conversation's not, we're not really anybody listening to us would say, that's not game design. They're just blathering about, stuff. And you're going, well,
that is game design.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, anyway, that's kind of what I got for you. I hope that's a solid chunk.
Absolutely. It's again helping me to remind myself of the initial inspiration for the game, and how sometimes it's very easy to get away from that, especially after 15 years.
Oh,
very easy to get away from that.
All right.
So, but no, absolutely, this helps. Absolutely.
All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to go and stagger off.
Okay.